Land outside Ridgewater's town limits has quietly changed hands along the backside of the bay. For years, this stretch of land has sat beyond the county's developed footprint. Wooded shoreline, open ground, and rough access with little reason for most residents to pay attention. That has started to change. Survey stakes are now visible near the tree line, dirt access is being cut into the property, equipment has been seen moving through the land that remains unincorporated, but no longer untouched. The activity appears to be tied to early resource interest, with small mining operations looking at the area before any formal settlement plan exists. That puts Ridgewater in a familiar position. Work is arriving first. Roads, support buildings, local services, and housing may follow because the jobs have created a reason for people to be here. The location also comes with limits. The bay sits nearby, and Ridgewater's existing water infrastructure remains across the water. No emergency has been reported, no public response has been announced, but the county's edge is beginning to move. And once work starts outside town limits, the question is not whether growth follows. It is what kind of place that growth becomes. Welcome back to Ridgewater County. Today we have a pretty fun day ahead. We have finally kind of gotten our first town in a pretty solid place. And we just kind of wrapped up our waterways with some more city attractiveness and just something to do in this town. And so, that puts us in a pretty good place to start looking outward. And I have been kind of eyeing this kind of, I guess, mountainside valley back here for a couple reasons. One is natural resources. Now, oil is here. It's kind of an odd place to launch up a mining operation, and really so is this here. With this lake here, just environmentally, that seems pretty awful. But we do have this ore, and on this mountainside, and so I think we can kind of take advantage of it and start putting together a larger pipeline of resources. And then there was a few off-screen changes. Our lighting is a little brighter, a little more crisp, and that's just something to help out. Now, one thing I guess I'd like to tackle before we get too far along is a few tidy cleanup things on the map. I personally cannot stand this tree. No matter how you want to tweak your graphics, it seems to always kind of give you a weird look, and that's just odd to me. So let's grab Bob real quick before we get started and just swap this thing out for something reasonable. Maybe a Norway. Keep it vanilla, and to me that looks automatically a whole lot better. So quick, easy changes to maps. It really can change your quality of life from an aesthetic standpoint. So first we have to kind of look at how to get over here and how we want to get over here. Now, we have this stub here coming off the industrial park, and it was kind of always intended and set up for, future expansion. Just at the time when we built it, back in episode 5, we didn't really know where that was going, but I think a small town is a good place for this road to head, and so we can kind of cross over and start looking at how we want to grow it. Today, I think there's a few builds to take care of before we jump into, we're definitely not going to be able to just build out an entire, this is about 4 or 5 tiles here. We're definitely not going to be able to do it in one day, one episode. But I think we need to start with why people will live out here, and that's jobs. And so we have a few builds planned, a little kind of out-of-town tractor, heavy equipment dealer, I think would fit well here. I think getting a little fishing in, but we're definitely not going to be a true fishing town by any means. But enough to where we can get some boats and we can kind of take care of that pipeline. And then we'll build our ore production out here on the mountainside, and that will really give us the full factory set that would really be that one factory town. And that's kind of what we're looking to build out here. So let's go ahead and get started with a road network out here and get some of it laid out, and so we can start building these things. Now we are going to have to buy a couple tiles. We can turn our borders back on. We're right on the edge here, so we'll need to go ahead and buy those. And we'll take this one because we basically have to. That's where the ore is. We'll pop out here. We need this one to get out here. And I'd say we still need that one. We'll take this one. And so I think that will be enough for us. Let's get some roads down and start setting some basics out, and then we can decide what we're going to build, where we're going to build it, once we kind of have a general footprint. Let's get our terrain on. And I definitely want to come pretty much straight across here, in a sense. I'm not going to line up to the other road. Now we can kind of cut this thing back down where it's not quite as gigantic, and but it still kind of mimics. And while we're here building a bridge, let's fix this ridiculous vanilla bridge from the map. I think that's plenty good. At least it's not this big hillside of a bridge. So let's go ahead and grab our dirt roads and start laying out some real structure here. Now, coming out through here, and it still wanted to try to bridge through there. So we might have to... Sometimes when you start messing with this, it throws normal road building into a wonky place. But let's grab that, and now we're out. Now, building out through here, we're definitely going to want to work with the terrain we have, work with the barriers, work with the forest, and that'll give us a lot of curvature and a lot of kind of natural, organic roadways coming through here. So we're just going to kind of do the kind of macro run through here, and we'll come out straight just a little ways before we start curving. And then I think we can take kind of a big giant curve. So I think we would want to work with the forest here a little bit. Cut in kind of through this natural gap here. And that's a pretty good start. Until we really open up or have this town developed, we don't really need to worry about what we're doing before the edge of the map. And so that kind of gets us one clean main vein, in a sense. So let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to interestingly connect. We'll have to force this one down as well. And that's not too bad. And that will work out for us. So now right here is kind of a interesting question, is now that this is becoming kind of what we would consider a collector, and we got some industrial on fire, this definitely needs to be bumped to our 4-lane. But what makes this area an interesting question, and we don't need that 4-lane. So what kind of makes this one an interesting area is that ideally we'd probably want this to be the connection and let a T-junction into the main run. But I think for now we'll leave it until we see kind of what traffic and everything else affects us. But it might end up being kind of a place to refactor, in a sense, and just kind of make this the main loop, maybe even upgrade the 4-lane all the way through, and then let the industrial park T-junction into that one, and that might be a better traffic pattern for us. But we'll, like I said, we'll see where that goes. You know, we have, you know, a lot to develop out here and some population to get in before we would really see what the traffic is going to do for us. Now, I think here is kind of a strong footprint for, I would say like a downtown in a sense, but it's going to be extremely minimal, because this is definitely that small sleepy town that everybody works at the same factory, and so, you know, we do need to either get across or a future intersection, and we'll just have to see what traffic does, being that this entire town would still rely off the one single source over in Ridgewater's first town. So let's go ahead and put a little grid in. We'll grab our dirt roads. You know, we want to give a little bit of node separation here. This is gridded in a sense, but it's also kind of about how you apply to the grid. So this is definitely going to have a lot more spacing than the first town, and it's going to be a lot more purposeful in what is provided. Because while this is a much smaller town, it's not going to have the same resources as a bigger town. So we'll have to kind of keep that in mind. So let's jump here. Let's go straight. Well, we'll jump here. A little closer with the wood line. It gives us a little easier carving. And we'll want to, once again, use our terrain to help us keep it organic. And so we have 2 crosses to get you back to the other side of town. And I think that kind of gives us our basic overall road network here for this sleepy town, because really from here, this is our primary road network for the entire town. So let's go ahead and get cut in up here, because we're definitely going to have to manipulate a lot of this area. It's quite steep. I mean, we're basically carving in the side of the mountain. So let's start with that. And I think let's take a look at our resources real quick. So we're going to want our ore mines out here. I think we're going to keep it pretty low key in a sense, because we're not really trying to look for this big grand. You know, with ore you can get the big cutter and start strip mining. You know, I don't think we're looking for strip mining here. So I think we would put our main operations just kind of out here. We'll still run dirt roads. We'll probably change it at some point. Let's grab a straight. And we are climbing a little bit, but not too bad. This is still quite flat. And that's enough to get started. Now, out here, I think is a good place on this dot, because it's still relatively flat, and we can kind of carve in for our main factory footprint, and we have our mines out here. So I think we'll go a little big overall. Nothing too crazy, but still pretty sizable. I think we'll grab about this height, because we can always clean up. All right, I think that'll be a pretty good pad. And then we can grab our roads. I think we would just want to start working with our topography lines best we can here. And so I'm just going to hug a line. And let's get our resource tab up. That takes care of our basic footprint to build that out. Now, while we're in the road building mentality, all right, so we would want to go ahead and kind of give ourselves a flat pad here. Because the way I envision this fishing industry, and I'll definitely be upfront, I don't live anywhere near water to be around a fishing industry or a harbor in any sense. So this is just kind of how I envision it and how I would think it would work in the sense of realism and you know, with a few, you know, just vacationing experiences of being on ocean sides and bays. But I'm definitely not familiar with fishing towns. And so I think that gives us our basic prep work. Now, from here, we need to go ahead, we need to pave some roads, we need to get a few utilities underneath. Now, we are going to deal with a certain amount of issues today because we're not starting with the actual downtown, we're starting with the industrial job side of it first. So let's take care of the roads and water, and then we'll just kind of start. I'd say just start building here to here to here. And now that, you know, we kind of reverse ordered our structure. Okay, so I went ahead and ran the power. Get some power lines out here, at least be hooked to the grid, and, you know, hopefully not completely tank our power too hard, because we definitely will have a power plant in our future soon. We're now expanding beyond our reasonable footprint to think that 3 windmills are getting the job done. So let's start right here. And, you know, so what I kind of have in mind is just a pretty simple, you know, I guess we just call it heavy equipment dealer. And, you know, and it's quite, to me, realistic that right outside of town, especially being that our first town is very farm heavy, that you would have a heavy equipment dealer. And we have a lot of heavy equipment in our trash facility, so, you know, I think it's pretty realistic. About 3 we'll cut in, and then I think we'll just kind of run a straight here, and we'll see how far we need to go. Just depends on what size we end up with. And before we lay too much footprint, I think we would have a little corner businesses here. And I don't want to outbuild myself, because I do think that we would have a few functional businesses right here before you would get into town and kind of leverage in out here. All right, let's grab this 7-Eleven, and we'll put it on this front facing road here. And then I think we would have some pretty reasonable use case here that you would think a little corner diner, I think, would fit pretty well here. And that kind of gives us that, you know, sleepy exit, but all the locals come out here every morning kind of thing. And then I think we can kind of just put a few industrial-esque buildings out here. Nothing crazy, but just enough that it looks like something was going on out here at some point. And I would say this tire shop. So let's scooch some things around a little bit. And I think that gives us a little nook of old buildings, maybe something, old business from way back when, has been managing there. Kind of small tire shop and a couple maybe vacant / still functional buildings. I think that'll kind of play off the end of our exit of the town into the mid-break to the next one. So that'll work well for us. So let's jump back over here and see where we're at, because we actually have quite a bit of space. So with those there, I think we can scoot this one out just a little more. That'll give us a good working footprint. And then I think we'll grab our small roads. Now, we might not go quite this far, but we'll go ahead and grid in what we're going to work with today. So let's go ahead and grab our farm dealer. We'll put him right on the edge. And then we'll just go ahead and slam down some concrete. All right, so from here, I think, I kind of want to make this kind of look like a big dealership. So it would have kind of multiple buildings that would serve different purposes, such as like parts and maintenance and, like a normal car dealership, but for equipment. So let's kind of make that feel happen here. So I think we would just kind of be off to the back, and I don't know what they're making, but packages. Close enough. And I think we could give it kind of one more. And it could be, just kind of the workshop. And I think with that, that's a pretty good space, but I think we could add one more. That'll work out pretty nice. So we can scoot out just a hair, come out here, close this in. And that will kind of be where we put our equipment. We can fence it in. And this is kind of your entry shop, maybe a parts shop, maintenance shop. And then we could put a quick parking. It's kind of short. Yeah, wide but short, still can handle the volume. And then I was going to kind of do a dual purpose here by clicking in the right place and jump to a warehouse. And this kind of, to me, would be shipping and receiving. But the reason, instead of just mock it with a commercial or industrial building, because there are some good buildings that mimic, we use some over in the bakery and mimic shipping and receiving well. We do still have a small issue with our forestry division. Plain timber is getting backed up because it has nowhere really to go, and we're not using it in the pipeline right now. So what I think we really can do is grab this warehouse and give it plain timber. And while that is a pretty strong distance, it will at least give our timber somewhere to go, and it'll kind of look like all the parts and receiving and stuff like that that goes on in these bigger industrial operations, the large equipment dealers. Kind of look busy. And so I think that kind of puts us in a good place as far as the general and, everything else to come in detail. And that takes care of this little micro hub. And, I think it gives us a good little separation here between them, but it's very, out of town-esque, but it's still relatively close to where a farmer would, if he needs to bring his tractor, here's the dealer. And and it's nice in the quiet part outside of town. I think it fits well here, and it makes a lot of sense. So let's jump over to our fishing. And I'm going to go kind of small, but I also want it fully self-contained. This isn't something I'm looking for monstrous kind of fishing industry or anything like that. And I'm not really looking for the traffic to overly hit. So let's see what we have out here. Anchovy and salmon. Salmon's probably the more interesting one. It can take us further out. While the fishing industry, if we're trying to be truly efficient with the fishing industry, you don't need that kind of distance. But I'd rather have the distance and look good than be 100% efficient. You know, it'll fill up long before it makes it out there. So let's go ahead and grab our salmon. And we'll just have to place some of these and then deal with them after the fact. So, and of course, you know, if you're working the industry, you know, it really wouldn't be that, you know, starting with a fishing harbor isn't really problematic, you know, or anything like that as far as accomplishing what this build is through a progression standpoint. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab seaweed farm. And no, I'm going to grab 2. And we'll put them here. And the reason I'm going to put them there is because I kind of envision something kind of interesting out here. I'm just going to use mods. Kind of accomplish this faster. Okay. Well, I think that kind of gives us a unique kind of bay fishing harbor in a sense. So, you know, we come out, we have 2 algae farms, so they're not going to be kicking out boats. So this one will though. And now I think we need to start looking at our shore where we want to come into it. Because we don't want to be so close to the water that the waves are hitting us. Now, from a self-containment point, we definitely don't want there to be any real issue out of storage or trying to take it somewhere it doesn't need to go. So I think we can put 2 in here, and then I think we can add 1 kind of supportive. It's not complaining about the road, so everything else is complaining pretty hard. We'll take those back off. Look at them. So now we need to go ahead and somewhat loop ourselves out of here. I do think, though, there could be an advantage to maybe running that a little tighter. Because there is no parking over here. Now, there is parking here, but I would think that's 100% associated with the factory, not the fish market. So, let's kind of work that in real quick. Let's come out a little further. And that'll give us kind of that flow. And in detail, I'll set up the route. I'm just going to make it long and winding and inefficient, if anything. So, because I'd rather the bay look interesting and realistic than be 100% efficient. We have the 2 algae farms to keep everything fed well. So, but let's go ahead and set these. One we should be on fish. The other one should be on commercial goods. So that takes care of any excess from here and any excess from the fish factory. And then everything else we can kind of clean up in detail. And give it a little bit more a unique look and less fragmented grass and weird stuff like that. Okay, so we're definitely going to still take some complaints overall. One, we don't have much population over here, so jobs are still coming out of our town over here, which we need a name for. Now that we're getting into two towns, it's hard to call it Ridgewater. It's really the county. So, you know, and town one isn't very attractive. So if you guys have any ideas, let me know. This is a fully self-contained fishing industry now, and I think overall it looks pretty reasonable. Not too big, not too dramatic, but still good and functioning. So let's now jump over and get a factory running. And we will need to start off with our district. Okay, well, I think that's plenty fair of a land purchase for it all. There was a little ore on the back side and right here on the tip. It made me think maybe they would buy the whole thing out, but I think we can stay a little more reasonable and on the smaller side. This is still a chunk of land. So let's get our main building down. And I think we'll take it and start it kind of down here on this end kind of entrance aspect of things. So now we have ore. Okay, so we have a main building, and then I think a workers barracks down here would kind of make sense as like the entry administrative type buildings. And then I think we would need a touch of parking down here. Yeah, I think that's more than enough. And I would say this is our main buildings. Now we can jump over here, and they definitely will complain, but I think it's fine for those complaints real quick, because I kind of want to make this look like it's one operational factory, but it also benefits us in using up most of the products here, most of the resourcing. So I think we can put 2 of these in, and that's our storage, mainly because that'll keep kind of the mines flowing at the very beginning. Then from here, I think we would need the true operational factory. This thing's a monster, but it I do think that it kind of fits the concept as like the primary functioning factory. Then I think we would need to kind of run out, because while this is a good factory, I definitely think it could be a little better as far as depth of factory. So we'll run fiberglass. That's definitely not where we want it. So let's flip this thing around, and we'll put it right here on the back end. Match these 2 up. Now we kind of have second operation to this as one factory. Then I think we would have, let's say something like this will work. This grinding mill. And then we would, let's see, is it glass? Yeah. So I think we can run the glass, because these 2, let's see, what is this one? Fiberglass. So that's glass, metal. So I think that kind of works out for us. And I think this will sit out here, but I think we can give it a little gap. make this a little bit more interesting. Now we kind of have one operational factory. I think now we can kind of finish off the look. Kind of raw products exposed. I think will give us a pretty good look out here. We don't need that. And then we are missing a little of the efficiency side. So I think a maintenance building out here look good. And I think that building would kind of fill us out. Now, I do think this would make sense to be one way to kind of keep the flow running in some kind of order. And then this row doesn't matter. But at least once they come in for drop-off, they're forcing themselves around. That's a little cleaner. Now, we do have a power issue out here. Not so much as far as getting the grid out here. That's not really the problem. But I do think a factory of this size is going to have its own dedicated substation. Should stop some complaining. Now we need to hop out here and actually get our product. So let's see. It's probably not going to like a lot of, but I think most of this is extremely steep and is not happy about it. So let's carve a couple. So I think that will hopefully take care of it. Let's see how far in we actually need to be. Quite a bit, so let's force that. I try to give it the good effort, the college effort. Still didn't like it. So that gets us our mines in. Now we can definitely do a little cleanup here. And I think that kind of takes care of our projects for the day. And, you know, I think that gives us a reason for this town to exist. This is our main employer for sure. And, you know, this is, I think, minimal enough to make our bay interesting, give this side of town a purpose. And, you know, this is more just an exit out of town and a good place to start growth, in a sense. It's an intermediate growth. And, you know, I thought it'd be nice to just kind of give it some character as we come in. So, but I think we're in a good place to detail this up, and then we can kind of take a glance at it, see what we need to do next, and just kind of wrap out. Okay. Well, I think we are in a pretty good shape detail-wise, and I think the first town has the jobs and what's needed to make sense for this overall development and bringing it around. I would hope that we're shooting for around 2 to 3, maybe 3,500 population max. But I went ahead and took care of getting an equipment yard in, and this has definitely helped out our plain timber and gives us a little warehouse with kind of blended into a different use case. We made a few changes. I kind of popped out that one asset, industrial, and threw a little bit more warehousing at it because we're still definitely overproducing pretty highly. To be expected though. Fish market kind of cleaned it up, turned it dirt. Used a pedestrian food truck to kind of give it some liveliness and a little bit extra, kind of farmer's market sense backdrop to the market. Parking, I think, blends in a little bit better as a dirt parking lot. And then just kind of put in a couple sidewalk cafes because I think these could be like highly isolated fish, food, seafood joints that would be leveraging this. We have a good bit of boat traffic. Unfortunately, they really ship out a ton. But we only have one. It's about the best we can do to put some traffic in there that kind of makes the bay look lively. And I think it did a pretty decent job there. Now, we're going to still keep dealing with this stuff. I do think that in this town's future, there probably is kind of a very, very small industrial park that isn't the one main operation. Mainly probably more of a warehousing type park that we can start kind of making this kind of a secondary hub location for storage and distribution. And that can kind of be its second kind of job and purpose as an unincorporated town. Over here, not too much with the entrance. It really didn't need much. That it's just what it is. It's just basically, administration. As this building levels up, it kind of gives us that look a little bit better. Now over here, once again, we have no real storage for metal and we don't have any distribution, but so we're going to fight that for a little while until we get a little bit more developed, but turn most of this dirt. Our one way seems to be settling out pretty well, and put a pathway through here that'll give us a little extra lighting. We might see some movement maybe, but if not, it looks kind of like one operation now, and that's kind of what I was shooting for. Out here, touch the land a little bit best you could without, you can definitely chase perfect a little too much at times out here. Even like right here, we could probably clean that up a little bit. That's a little much, a little steep. Once again, there's always those cases where you can always be doing a little bit more at all times. I mean, I'm sure we can go over into the town one and find a million things we could add or adjust or change, and that's just the way cities are. Kind of touch that up. Still wanted it to be a little cliffside, little entry. Each one's powering itself, and that's fine because it kind of kept the power lines out of here. It still looks pretty rough and rugged through here to look like kind of just a underground mining operation. We're not strip mining. I don't think that's what we wanted on this particular build. It's got a great view out here though. Outside of that, I think this puts us in a pretty good place to assess our issues that we're going to get from an operation like this for the look and the aesthetics of it, and it sets us up to be able to kind of come in here and just really go after singular purpose for a really sprawled type of town that we're going to end up building here. Definitely would love to hear your thoughts on the fishing. Like I said, I have very little real world experience with what they're supposed to look like. I personally, I like the way it looks. It seems very fishing pier, very production focused in a sense. But definitely, anyone that lives near one, let me know. Did I do a horrible job, a decent job? What we looking at? But outside of that, we'll definitely pick up next episode and start to look to fill this town in and start getting that spread out depth that we're looking for, and get some of this stuff kind of settled and more functional, and let this kind of be a kind of intermediate distribution town, to where when we kind of take on that bigger industrial build of a town that is focuses industry, we'll have all the resources needed for some of our specialty factories and unique factories, and and really start to work the chain of industries DLC. So, and then of course in detail, I did take care of a few maintenance things. Some things needed dumped and reset. But if not, definitely love to hear from you, and we'll see you next episode.